was it Ohio from Ontario from
Yeah.
Ohio, whatever it is. You've got that ability to file share with multiple users. But of course, there are some perceived disadvantages too, and those disadvantages being the fact that you need to have maintenance and education. Was it Ohio from Ontario? There you go. We got an echo there. Sorry, but you need obviously, like we talked about, maintenance and education when it comes to a single standalone server, which is your world, really.
Yeah, really.
That's where we come in.
Yeah, with the maintenance and education. So I did not come from an IT background or anything like that when I initially started. So when it came to education, I was pretty much, if anyone here doesn't have very much experience with open source or dealing with the hardware of a storage server, if I can learn it, you can learn it. It's and again, like Ashley said, that's what we're here for. We're a kind of think of us not only as a kind of a vendor of storage solutions, but of education as well.
Yeah. And just to sort of blip there, but just for anyone who's just joining us live on YouTube, there's just a couple of slides you missed. I clicked live. It seems like we had a little bit of technical difficulties, so we do apologize. So for anyone who's joining us on live, basically you just missed an introduction to 45 drives in this particular webinar. And right now we're talking about when it comes to your workflow, essentially what kind of tools you would incorporate to adopt essentially data storage and how that affects your workflow when it comes down to it. But moving on and talking about the next slide here. So when it comes to the ideal storage solution, and then talking about hardware and software specifically, that's exactly what we provide here at 45 Drives. We provide the hardware to help with your storage infrastructure, your data storage infrastructure, but also to the software. And we'll get into the software in just a little bit later on, specifically when it comes to Houston UI.
Oh, yeah.
But also, sort of combining those two and talking about being your single point of accountability when it comes to knowledge installation, the commissioning of this storage server, as well as all of the robustness, performance, flexibility that is synonymous with open source. Again, that's what we provide here at 45 Drives, is we're your single point of accountability. We're your single point of responsibility when it comes to specifically data storage and further still storage servers. So talking about storage servers and specifically 45 Drives, they're fast. They're reliable. They're easy to administer through our Houston UI, but they're also scalable. I mean, you can start out with a storage server from 45 Drives with as little as 4 bays. Yeah. And then get upwards of sometimes 60, depending on your needs.
Yeah, you can keep building there. And the great thing is, we'll get into this in a little bit, but you don't have to kind of relegate yourself to only one sort of workflow, or one type of storage medium, like only having Rust drives or only having all flash. Like you can have a mix, you can use them for different applications, but I'm getting ahead of myself there a bit.
It's a good segue because talking about specifically the benefits of a Storinator as they pertain to 45 Drives. So like we talked about, we here at 45 Drives, we provide affordable, large storage solutions. And those storage solutions allow you to access your data from the one centralized location, giving you the ability to not only administer from that one location, but also to share it easily across, different clients, different users, what have you. They are easy to set up, and they are also configured by our 45 Drives engineers. So for anyone who missed at the top, like I talked about Spencer on the other end there, he's one of our data storage architects, and he would help engineer a system that's going to work specifically for you, as well as our support team, that Zach is a part of as well.
Yeah, and we'll help configure, we'll help do any troubleshooting, initial setup, things like that.
Yeah, which is a great segue into talking about remote access.
Yeah, so with remote access or IPMI, or ILO, I believe is another kind, but we're strictly talking about IPMI. But so that is something where we would remote into your system. So it's I believe the term is out of band network, IP, excuse me there. I'm drinking decaf, so I'm not at my full right now. But so basically, if let's say you were to have some sort of network issue where you can't access your storage, you can't access the Houston UI, something like that, we can still get into the system, into kind of into the actual into a command line interface, basically, and do any troubleshooting from there. So we can still give you a hand remotely, or you yourself can actually go in. You're not going to be in a situation where you lose the Houston UI. Oh, I can't do anything. But then we also have Nextcloud, which is kind of an on-site cloud provider, if that's the proper term. But so you can just with the Nextcloud implementation, all your storage lives on your servers themselves. Again, Nextcloud is another open source free application to excuse me, and that is something where you can upload things onto Nextcloud, and people remotely can access the data that's on the servers. Excuse me.
Yeah. And talking about being able to file share. So you can also, like I talked about, sort of hinted at earlier, you can file share with multiple users via whether it's externally or externally. We also talked about too a little bit earlier, talking briefly about RAID and being able to implement RAID to provide redundancy, to obviously protect against your any failure loss, any data that you have. You can set up a variety of permissions. So like being able to access and who can access those sorts of things. And then obviously it's compatible, like Zach kind of hinted at, with Dropbox, Amazon S3, Backblaze, and Microsoft Azure. But just talking about those benefits of the Storinator, and talking about being your single point of accountability, being your single point of responsibility, that's what our support team is there for, is to help you not only set up these Storinators and our storage servers, but also provide you with any additional help along the way. And then talking specifically about our units and what is included in our storage units, our unique architecture. So when it comes to unique architecture, I'll leave this here so that everyone can read it for just a moment. But one of the first takeaways that I always like to drive home when it comes to 45 drives infrastructure is the fact that it's direct wired, which is unique to 45 drives. But that, of course, means that there's no multiplexers in our system. And also, too, we have a trusted supply chain. But with that trusted supply chain comes the fact that we're using enterprise-grade components. So they're battle-tested, they're tried and true, but they're also commodity-based. So you have the freedom to be able to choose them wherever you want. I always like to say, it's your storage infrastructure. You should be able to change it and adapt it as you see fit. So, I mean, if you found a better price on whatever the site is online, your preferred provider, you have the freedom to be able to go and purchase that from wherever you want.
Yeah, there's no vendor lock-in. It's not you're not being, might be a little hyperbolic, you're not being held hostage with your storage server.
Yeah, exactly. But kind of some of the hesitations that we often come up against is the fact that it's open source. I mean, historically with open source, there's been no single point of accountability. There's been no single point of responsibility. Depending on your familiarity with open source, there can sometimes be a bit of a learning curve. Sometimes too, depending on your organization, depending on your company, what have you, sometimes too, just, a fear of buying into open source from whether it's other colleagues, management, what have you, a fear of the command line even, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But even these fears or these disadvantages that we talk about with open source, singing the praises of 45 drive Storinators, these are long since going away, especially like now that open source becomes more and more popular. It's a worldwide technology.
Yeah, the kind of the way that I like to put it, with people having, a fear of the command line with the Houston UI, we kind of take that command line user interface and all the power that is behind that, of things that you can do in the terminal, and kind of give that a nice, easy to use UI without the, the fear of accidentally deleting all of your data.
So talking about open source, specifically how it pertains to 45 drives storage solutions and 45 drives storage servers, and talking about the benefits of open source, like Zach had just mentioned, there's no vendor lock-in. So you're not tied into that 2-year, 3-year, 5-year contract. There's no fear of going in and say swapping out a hard drive and then voiding the entirety of the warranty or the contract. There's no inflated prices when it comes to open source. And the sort of B point of that, which I would dare say is the glaring advantage of open source, is the fact that there are no licensing fees associated with open source. So you have the freedom to be able to do with that software whatever you want, but also there's no price tag associated with it, which is, I think it's probably the advantage for many people, if not everyone, is the fact that you're not paying for it. But we've kind of hinted at all along is talking about, open source and talking about the fears of open source, and specifically the fears of jumping into the command line. Well, we've built a tool here at 45 Drives called Houston, and we're actually going to kind of give you a quick walkthrough of that now. But I'm going to turn it over to Zach, because Zach, being from our service team, he's working in Houston day in, day out. So he's far better suited to go through it than I am. So why don't you show everyone, Zach, what Houston actually entails?
Will do. So, talking about the Houston command line or command
center. I'm talking
excuse
about the
me.
command line.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, it's easy to use, easy to navigate. Kind of like I said, it gives you that power of working in the command line, but without the fear and with the ease of use as using a GUI. And, you have control over your storage infrastructure. You can make any sort of changes, change your permissions, change your storage, things like that. Again, in the UI without having to relegate to the command line. And like Ashley had mentioned earlier, this is for anybody from your entry-level administrator, home user, all the way up to your experienced admin. And it's directly integrated with your 45 Drives hardware, which we'll see in the next few slides there. And it's powered by, again, how we love open source, an open source project called the Cockpit Project. And it's engineered to give you all of the system information and tools you'll need without any of the clutter or bloatware. Again, we'll see that in the next few slides about what kind of information it does provide for you. And, it's very, very flexible, and it can adjust to any kind of requirements you need. Like, let's say your use case changes 6 months down the road. Well, we can, it's very easy, or somebody on the support team can lend a hand with doing any sort of changes or implementing any sort of requirements you may need for your workflow. So with this just being a kind of little splash page of your 45 Drive system, you get some base information here that is great for either passing on to the support team to help you with troubleshooting, or any other sort of issues that may pop up. As you can see here, tells you what kind of Storinator you actually have, chassis size, your serial number. Also mentions the manufacturer of your motherboard and the serial number for that. And of course, your CPU, its running temperature, and it goes a little bit deeper than that. As you can see here, it lists all of our PCI slots. It'll say the type, if they're available or in use, its bus address, the card type. It's very, very detailed without having, go again into the command line and running LSPCI or anything like that and going through and finding it. And again, you can see what RAM slots are actually in use, which is great for troubleshooting. If you have a DIMM that goes out, it's like, oh, it's, let's see, the entire thing's full, but oh, DIMM B1 doesn't have anything listed in it. Okay, it must be that one, instead of, popping off the chassis or again, going into the command line. Then we also have, things like your network interfaces, if they're up, down, their MAC address. And this is kind of a good representation of where I mentioned about not having to go in the command line, because I still do it every once in a while because I'm a bit familiar with the command line, but
I am not. So this is perfect.
Yeah, so exactly, yin and yang sort of thing. But yeah, like all of these things, like network name, all of that going in MTUI or NetPlan, something like that. LSPCI, like I mentioned before, but now you have it all on one page or in a tab. Very, very easy to use. So just taking, this is a bit of an interactive view of your motherboard here. As you can see, you have your PCI slots, your RAM, your motherboard, which you're looking at it, you think, oh yeah, that's great. It's a little picture of everything. But you go to the next slide here, and you can actually click on this interactive motherboard and again, see the slot type, the device type, the slot that it's in, the model, everything, which is another great tool for troubleshooting or just general knowledge. Let's say you needed to get another HBA or another stick of RAM, you're unsure. This is 2 years down the road, you lost the your bill of materials, something like that. Yeah. Well, this is just a great thing that again brings you out of the command line. Yeah. And talk about end-to-end support a little bit here, because that is me and my colleagues. So everything from the decision-making to design and deployment. Design and deployment, that would be Mitch and Spencer's territory, who are two of our fantastic architects here at 45 Drives. And then deployment and maintenance would be myself and my other wonderful colleagues in the support team. And, we ensuring you get the right sort of storage solution for your needs. We support both the hardware and the open source software as well. So again, you're not in that unfamiliar territory anymore. I kind of like to say this, think of us as kind of a addition or kind of your IT team for your 45 drive server. Yeah. We also offer 24/7 hardware support. We have remote managed services, preventative maintenance, automated alerting system, if a disk goes down, if your pool becomes unavailable for whatever reason. We have integrated remote training available and consulting services. And with that, I'll kind of toss it back over to Ashley.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just further still talking about our full support team, like Zach had kind of hinted at, it's especially helpful for those of you who are just getting started on your sort of data storage journey. For anyone on YouTube who kind of missed it, we just started off this particular webinar with showing you a couple of pictures actually of different misplaced hard drives, what have you. But just kind of bringing it back to 45 drives is where your single point of accountability, where your single point of responsibility when it comes to your storage infrastructure, but also then helping you support it along the way. So it's not like if you were to, ideally purchase a storage server from 45 drives, you're not then just left to your own devices. Yeah. Zach and the team, our full team there, are going to be there for you from start to finish. And for someone like myself, who's not familiar with the command line, the Houston UI is a great tool to be able to easily administer your storage infrastructure. So when it comes to implementation, so depending on what you're going to be using essentially your storage infrastructure for, we would decide, part of the process is sort of submitting an inquiry to our account managers. We would then decide for you or help you decide the solution that's going to best suit your needs, at which point we would get you in on an engineering call if that made sense and really understand your specific use case, understand what you're going to be using your storage infrastructure for, and then we would help you implement it. So we would help you obviously, or rather we would deliver the architecture to you, you would rack it and connect it to the internet, and then we would help you configure it, provide you with any additional training, as well as provide you with any additional training on the Houston UI as well, not just specific to the infrastructure that you're using.
Yeah, and it goes, sorry to cut you off there, but it goes a little deeper than that as well, along with configuring it for you. It's not just sort of a base configuration, here's your pool and you're off to the races sort of thing. If you have any sort of, third-party integration, we can set it up so it works very well with any sort of disaster recovery, like Veeam or Commvault. If you are tying it into your Active Directory, we can help you with that as well. And it's just very, very, like I said, that goes back to being an addition to your IT team for the storage server.
Yeah. And then just talking briefly about 45 drives and I being part of the marketing team, I always like to joke that we call this the brag page. But really it's just there to drive home that we've been doing this for over 15 years now. We're growing like crazy, pushing upwards of almost 300 employees now. I mean, you can see from the caliber of logos, just the types of organizations that we work with, Red Hat specifically, NASA, Apple, Intel, the list goes on. But further to that, just to solidify and ensure your confidence in us that we're not just this company that's popped up 6 months ago, surviving on some venture capital money, it's going to disappear in 6 months' time. We're going to be here for you for the long run, and we're going to continue being here for you for the long run for many, many years to come. So here's what we've covered today. So we covered briefly just anyone who's interested in sort of data storage, the typical IT needs and requirements that one would have. How do you take things like a stressful, chaotic, messy workflow and improve those when it comes to your storage infrastructure? Talk briefly about the solutions that were available to you. So we talked about external hard drives. We talked about LTO. We talked about cloud storage. We also just talked generally about storage servers, and then specifically 45 drives, our Storinator line, the benefits of an open source storage server. You went through Houston UI, and then we just talked about how you would implement a storage server for your particular needs, your particular day-to-day operations. And just to wrap it up, so talking about resources that are available to you. So every Tuesday, we do, for those of you on YouTube or familiar with our YouTube channel, we do Tuesday Tech Tips or Tech Tip Tuesday videos, however you prefer to say that. Every Tuesday, we release them on our YouTube channel, just covering topics like Ceph, open source technology, ZFS, et cetera. We have a knowledge base, which I believe, Zach, is managed and supported by the service team here.
Yeah.
So you and your colleagues are often filling that up with lots of good stuff,
Yeah,
updates.
always being updated. If something changes or we find a better way to implement something new comes along, we're pretty quick to make that available for any sort of end customer.
Yeah, we do private webinars in addition to these public ones. So these public ones, we offer them once every probably two to 4 weeks, this particular topic. But we also have a topic for those of you who are interested. We do one also on Ceph clustering, and we so happen to be going live with that tomorrow at the same time, 3 o'clock Atlantic Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So if you think that maybe clustering is right for you, if you've kind of hit a point where you're running out of storage space, you realize that you kind of need to start scaling your infrastructure, Ceph might be right for you, and specifically Ceph clustering. We also offer customer case studies, which is just a variety of like success stories.
For different use cases, like how they implemented it or how it's been implemented, how it's working for them.
Yep. Exactly. And then lastly, just storage articles, which I always used to just kind of call it like a catch-all for anything unrelated to, knowledge base and customer case studies, et cetera, just like FAQ type stuff, unanswered questions, those sorts of things. But that's all we have today. I just wanted to maybe go over 1 or 2 questions here, Zach, that I think we got. And one of them being, let's see here, let's find the question. So when or where would you recommend moving to a clustered solution versus a single server?
There's a few situations, but kind of the big ones that come to mind is, of course, you see yourself rapidly needing more data. If you are planning for the future, if you need, let's say, 500 terabytes now, but it's like, oh, we may expand up to a few petabytes. And it doesn't have to get that large. It's another great thing about clustering itself is if you also want a system that is, highly available and easily scalable. So if you were to have a Ceph cluster, you're not going to have that single point of where something may fail for you. There's a lot of fail safes within Ceph that keeps it running, keeps everybody happy. And again, it's one of those things that's a little more advanced, but again, a lot of it is outside of the command line, thankfully.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Another one we got. So I noticed there was an error message on the Houston UI screen. What kind of notifications will Houston give you when it comes to errors?
So in that specific page, I'll actually just scroll back there. Oop, got the wrong one.
Go back. Yeah. I think, that's the one they were referring to.
So in the services tab. So this specifically has to do with different services within Houston that may have failed, but let's take one, for instance. If you have an SMB share and you've all of a sudden lost access to your SMB share, you can go on the server, see what happened, the SMB service has failed, or there was a restart at some point. You can actually click on that service. It populates the logs right there, tells you what that actual, what happened, timestamps. It's a very, very powerful tool for troubleshooting. And speaking of notifications as well, let's say if you were to have a drive go down or any sort of issue with your pool, we can, there's tools that we have that you can get email notifications, Slack, things like that, to say, hey, I have a drive down, I'll have to replace this. But the great thing about ZFS implementation and RAID is that if you have one drive go down, you're not going to be, in this terrible spot. It's just like, oh yeah, I'll get that in the morning, sort of thing.
Okay. And then lastly, what kind of VDEV or VDEVs does 45 drives recommend? I'm assuming this is specific to ZFS.
Yeah, it's in regards to ZFS, I'll just speak on that because it's what I'm more well versed in. So what we recommend really depends on your workflow. If you value, storage efficiency, how much storage you have, and data redundancy, how safe your data is. So if you have, let's say, a database application, something with a lot of small files or with a high amount of IO, we usually recommend, a RAID 10, talking about like any sort of large sequential files. Let's take in XL60. If you filled up with 4 VDEVs of 15 drives apiece, you can have or I should preface that a little bit. A RAID Z2 is kind of what we use for a your large sort of files compared to, your RAID 10. And speaking towards data redundancy a little bit, if going back to that XL60 example, if you were to have, set that up in a RAID Z2, well, you could have 2 drives go down in each one of those VDEVs for a total of 8 drives total.
Okay.
Now, again, if you didn't want to lose those 8 drives or giving up 8 drives to your data redundancy, if you want to do RAID Z1, you would lose 4. But again, that all comes back to your personal choice. And there's so many other just tweaks and things that we can change, record size, depending on your workflow.
Mhm.
One of our architects, actually, Mitch Hall, had did a fantastic video that I recommend everybody give a watch if you're not too familiar with, benchmarking, IO, things like that.
Yeah.
He goes into that and how these sort of changes can really help your workflow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's it for questions. So thank you to those of you who did submit questions. They were great ones. So like I kind of talked about, we do this webinar once every roughly 2 to 4 weeks. There's no specific formula on it. We just kind of, gauge from our customer base and our subscriber base when to offer these. So just stay tuned to our social media channels as well as here on YouTube. We will definitely put up when we're going to go live, as well as for those of you who attended on Zoom. Thank you. And we'll send you another notification when we are going live with the next one. But again, like I talked about, we do have a live Ceph webinar tomorrow as well. We dive into the specifics of kind of clustering in general, but also talking to you about Ceph technology and Ceph software. So that's live again here on YouTube, as well as here on Zoom tomorrow at 3:00 Atlantic, 2:00 Eastern time. So that's it. That's all we have for today. So thank you to everyone who joined us. We really, really appreciate it. Apologies for the loss of a couple of minutes there at the top. We click live, go on live on YouTube, and then there's a pop-up, and I just think we missed it. But anyway, we're live on YouTube now. So thank you to those of us that joined us, and thank you to those who submitted questions. And we will hopefully see you again, if not tomorrow, hopefully